Welcome to the Compassionate Leaders Circle podcast. For thousands of years, the sages have known that compassion is a powerful force for good. In the last 2 decades, compassion scholars caught up with these sages, proving that there is an ROI to building loving communities and businesses. This podcast features leaders who can teach us about the power of compassion. It is my great honor to welcome Laila Tarraf to the Compassionate Leaders Circle podcast. Laila is an amazing, distinguished, compassionate leader with working with brands like Walmart.com and Pete's, and she's going to talk about her current position as Chief People Officer at Allbirds, a very cool company. But in addition, we're going to focus on her amazing book that is being released soon. It's called Strong Like Water, How I Found the Courage to Lead with Love in Business and in Life. So happy to have you, Laila. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, Laurel.
Before we shift into your phenomenon, that is it your first book?
It's my first book.
It's amazing. I'd like my listeners to know about Allbirds because it's such a cool company and they might not know that. So I'd love you to introduce Allbirds to all of us, and then I'm going to ask you about your role there, and then we'll shift into the book.
Sure, absolutely. Allbirds is an amazing company. It is a sustainable footwear and apparel company. It was founded in 2016 by 2 co-founders. Tim Brown is a New Zealand citizen. He was a football player. He was on the 2010 World Cup soccer team that won the World Cup that year. And Joey Zwellinger, who is a local guy here in the Bay Area. And Tim and Joey met through their wives, who were college roommates, because Tim had this idea to make shoes out of sustainable sheep's wool, because there's more sheep than people in New Zealand. And he had been sort of obsessing about this for years and years. And then when he was in business school, funny enough, he ended up taking a class from a good friend of mine, Carter Cast, and he, through that class, was encouraged to start a Kickstarter. And it was really successful. In 3 days, they sold out of 1,000 shoes, and he thought, oh my gosh, now I have to make these. And so that's how it started, very organically, in more ways than one. And when Tim connected with Joey, Joey's more the finance operations guy, and they thought, you know what, let's give this a go. So it started modestly, and in Joey's mother-in-law apartment here in San Rafael. And in the first year, the company grew to 16 million just out of the chute. And, you know, it's an interesting story. We're a B Corp, and so we care very much about, you know, what we call the triple bottom line, right? People, planet, and profits. And I think companies develop a core DNA when they're founded, right? And it's really hard for companies to shift to be something they're not over time. I mean, I think that's how companies and industries get disrupted. And for Allbirds, sustainability through product innovation is just ground zero. That is our DNA at the core. And I think because of that, and the fact that the design is really simple and clean and not fussy, and it's so comfortable. I mean, I wasn't a sneakerhead, but you put these things on and you feel like you're wearing slippers. So the combination of all those things, I think, and then riding the trend, the external cultural trend of everything getting a little more casual, and that was even before everybody was working from home. I think all those things came together, and Allbirds became, you know, what we call a unicorn, right? Just a company that just grows very, very quickly. And so I'm the Chief People Officer, and I've been there for almost 2 years. I can't believe it now. And we're trying to grow in a healthy, sustainable, durable way, which is a challenge, right? Because growth requires you to really make decisions every day that do you compromise quality for growth? Do you compromise sustainability for growth? Growth demands you to feed the engine all the time, and how you feed it matters and determines how you grow, whether it's in a sustainable way, not only for your product but for your people. And I don't need to tell you that this is a very challenging time that we're living in right now. So just, I heard the CEO the other day say that leadership now is like playing 3D chess. It's everything is moving all the time. And I would have to agree.
I've been thinking a lot about, we need to use our whole bodies as leaders, our minds and our bodies. It's an embodied experience. And I so appreciate, I know from other conversations we've had, that you really have a seat at the table and you're at the top of this organization as the chief people officer. I also appreciate that your second year and in such an important position was during COVID. So tell us about how you all pivoted during COVID, how you took care of your people during this interesting time.
It's a great question. I don't know that anybody feels like they're doing this really awesome. There's no playbook, and we're just trying to make our way through. I had actually been at the company less than 6 months fully before COVID hit. And so I was just still in my first year trying to get to know the people and learn how to work with founders, which, is unique in of itself. Plus you have 2 people playing one role. And then all of a sudden things got hard. I think it tested us. It tested the company, and it tested all of our relationships. And I would have to say, I think the first few months, if I would have given myself a scorecard, it would have not been good. It would have been maybe on the other side of C. It took a few months to figure out what we were dealing with, right? And the magnitude of it. It took a little while to sink in as well. But straight away, we started talking to our employees right away. We had weekly all hands. And even if in the beginning we were just saying, we don't know what's happening or how long this will go, we pretty quickly developed a framework to help orient people where we were, right? So here's what here's where the virus is, here's what the government organizations are saying we need to do if it's shelter in place. And then we applied on top of that our own set of principles. So people knew what was grounding us in the decisions that we were making, even if we weren't sure what those decisions were going to be. And the first thing was the health and the physical health and safety of our employees. And then on top of that was their emotional well-being. And then on top of that was the health of the business. So, and then it went on from there. But straight away, we said, first and foremost, we want to make sure you're physically healthy and safe. And then we moved right away to emotional well-being, because we have a young company and there were a lot of people that were all by themselves at home, isolated. So, the difficulty of the virus is that everyone's personal situation is different, and there was no one size fits all. So you had some young parents who were trying to figure out how to take care of toddlers while they were working, and that was one set of challenges. And then you had other single people who were all by themselves and really isolated, and that was another set of issues. So it really challenged us, and I would say we just kept on talking about it. I brought in speakers talking about self-care. We brought in someone talking about grief and what it meant to lose something like your freedom, and how that feeling that we were feeling, remember the Harvard Business Review article, that feeling you're feeling is grief. And so we picked up on that. We talked about it. Nothing was off limits. And then BLM hit and all the social unrest. And that also lit a fire and had us looking at, what were our unconscious biases and what were we going to do to make sure that we could have these very uncomfortable conversations. So in hindsight, it made us stronger. My CEOs last week, it was my review, and they said, well, we made it. And the first few months, it was pretty tough. But now, when situations happen that are really tough like that, if you can get through it, then you're sort of bonded, right? Mm-hmm. And we use this, and now we say we're in the foxhole together now. Yeah. And it really does feel that way.
What did you learn about yourself through all of that?
That's a good question. I think I learned that I was able to step into very much of a leadership role more than I would have thought. And not because I'm such an awesome leader, but because what was expected at the time was someone who would make the space for all these emotions to come up. And Laurel, you know, that is not who I used to be. And that's what, I talk about in my book. And in a way, I feel like this personal journey I had been on, where I learned to reconnect with my feelings and allow myself to be more vulnerable, was really put to the test last year. And immediately I just knew what was happening and what was needed, and that I didn't need to solve everyone's problems, because I couldn't anyway, right? Where I think, 5 years ago, I would have had a lot more anxiety thinking that I had to solve this thing. And and that's the nice thing, I guess, about age, is I just knew this was not for me to solve. And all I could do was hold the space for others, whatever comes up, even if it triggered me, even if I didn't like what people were saying. And people, when you're not in a good place, they say a lot of things, or the company's not taking care of me, and what about this, and what about that? And there were definitely moments where I would get triggered, and I'd be like, it's okay, just bring it down and allow my heart to stay open and come from a place of compassion. And I don't think I felt like I was succeeding in the moment, but now looking back on it, I can see that we held everyone intact, and we are stronger for it. So I think that was probably one of the executives said, "You've sort of become the beating heart of the company." So I really cherish that she said that. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And based on what I know about you and what I read about you in your beautiful book, I'm not surprised. So as Compassionate Leaders Circle, we honor compassionate leaders. And I really understand that the personal work we do as leaders comes out, especially under times of stress, to provide space. And I think often about, to have a compassionate organization, you need to have, self-compassion. You need to be vulnerable and be able to ask for help, or, and provide an atmosphere where people can ask for help. And then you also need to be compassionate with each other or with others. And I feel like your book is a story that tells all three of those things and demonstrates them so beautifully. I love that you shared the Allbirds creation story. I love to hear creation stories. And although I've read it, it's just so fun to hear it from someone from inside. But I'd love to hear the creation story of your beautiful book. How did it come about?
Well, I had about 5 years in my life where I suffered 3 big losses. And up until that point, I really had been very lucky and didn't experience a lot of adversity in my life. So when my daughter was 3, and it was in my first year as the chief people officer at Pete, so just really got my training wheels on to be a senior leader, my husband passed away suddenly from an accidental drug overdose. And then 15 months later, my father, who was in his late 60s, had a stroke and passed away about 15 months later. And then my mother passed away 3 years after that. So I had a period of 5 years where the 3 people closest to me passed away. And I had never experienced anything like that. I was a young mother. I was a young executive trying to make my way. And the normal coping mechanisms I had always used to get through tough times was not to deal with them, to tuck those messy feelings away and stay above it and lean into doing things and being active and being helpful and resourceful and capable. And those are all really, really great qualities, but they were not going to help me to grieve in a healthy way and help me to process my feelings so that I could release them. And even though I couldn't have put these words to it back then, I just knew that I needed to go within and to be sad and to allow myself to feel all these feelings that I'm not exaggerating when I say I really never allowed myself to feel. Just my orientation to life was always super sunny. You're just not looking at it the right way, and that was how I got through a bit of a tough childhood. So they were qualities that helped me survive. Being a first generation immigrant, my parents moved here from the Middle East. My parents didn't have a good relationship, and so that was what I needed to do to get through that. But then what happens in life, right, is the qualities and the stories you tell yourself that save you at some point begin to hold you back. And I don't know that I would have actually allowed myself to go through that kind of grief had I not had my daughter, because here she was 3 years old, she'd lost her father, and she would very, very healthily cry and want her father and just all this raw emotion. And I realized, oh my gosh, in order for me to help her be with this loss, feel it, process this, I have to do it too, because if I didn't do it, I couldn't be there for her. And I might have shut it away if it was just me, but I couldn't do that for her. I just couldn't. I had to be there for her. So down I went into the valley. And the hardest part is you just don't know how long it lasts, right? Grief comes in big waves and small waves, and it could hit you out of the blue, and then you could just be fine. And I'd never allowed myself that much ability to feel and to be anything less than really cheerful. So that was a big, big learning from me, and that is what I ended up writing my book about. It really, at a very simple level, it's how I relearned how to connect to my feelings and to be more vulnerable and to come out the other side stronger, not weaker. Because you think that I'll fall apart and I won't be able to hold it together. But the irony is, the more you allow yourself to be vulnerable, the stronger you get. So that's why I wrote the book. When I started to tell my story, some of my learnings and my insights to friends, I was so surprised how often they said, "Oh yeah, I do that too. Oh yeah, I know what you mean." And I started thinking, maybe I'm not the only person that does this, that resists the bad feelings. And maybe if I share some of my insights with others, it might help them on their journey and light the path, right? Because we all learn in different ways, and maybe a certain way that I say something or I experience it can really touch something in somebody else that can be an unlock for them in their lives. And so that's really why I wrote the book.
Well, thank you for writing the book. I read the book last week in two settings, and it's profound, and it's still working on me. And I appreciate you sharing so much of yourself and so much of your life. So tell me, between the losses and the healing, when did the idea, I'll make this a book, come about?
That's a good question. After my mother passed away, she died in June, and I had been at Pete's for 7 years, and we sold the company to a private equity firm. And it was just a moment in time where a lot of the existing leaders were leaving. My CEO was leaving, and I decided after 7 years, it was a nice time to just say, okay, I've done my work here, and I'm going to take a year off. And so I helped to onboard the new CEO for 6 months. And then my daughter and I spent a blissful year in the south of France. She was in a bilingual French school here in San Francisco, and she was 9 years old at that point, and we just went to the south of France. It was the first time in my adult life I had ever allowed myself not to have any sort of responsibilities outside of myself. And it was a little at first I felt a little unhinged, but it was a year of incredible restoration. I worked out. I was really fit. I ate. I traveled. I lived, really lived, in a whole body embodied way. And the Europeans do it so much better than we do, and certainly the French do. And so I allowed myself to be a little more French. I like to say I reconnected with my inner princess, because the French women have no issue sort of putting on makeup and being very honest with the needs that they have, which was not my style at the time. And so I learned to be a little more compassionate, self-compassionate, as you said. And when I came back, is when I had journaled a lot that year in France. I thought, I think these stories come together, and I think there's something here. And so that's when I started to write.
So there's the writing of this beautiful book, which to me is so much more than a leadership book. It's so much more than a memoir. It's a book about grief and healing and personal growth and love. So much is in there. It's a beautiful story. And I just want to say that it is a page turner, and I think it should be a movie someday as well. So it's a very unique piece of art. I'm just curious, because it doesn't fit into a genre, how you got it published.
Yeah.
Thank you, publisher.
Yes, She Writes Press is my publisher. And you're right. When I started talking to agents, most of them said, this is interesting. Love your writing, but can you make it more of a how-to? Because the story really is about how those losses became a catalyst for me to learn important lessons in my life that I put into practice as a leader, as a mother, as a person, as a woman. And it really sat at the intersection of personal memoir and leadership guide. And psychological probe is one of the reviews I've gotten recently. And I tried for maybe 6 months to rewrite it as a how-to, and it just felt so inauthentic and so wooden and kind of boring. I thought I wouldn't want to read this. And then I just got to a point where I thought, you know what? I have to put this out into the world in its current format, because it continues my healing. I mean, it is, as you say, raw and vulnerable. And I still have moments where I'm like, oh gosh, am I really putting this out there? Like all the flaws and all the decisions I made, and how clueless I was for so long about how I was showing up. I think that's part of my journey. It's always going to be a challenge for me to be more vulnerable, because I'm so wired to be strong and capable. And now I just need a reminder all the time that you can be that way, but be a little more vulnerable. And thank goodness She Writes Press saw that. She Writes really takes a lot of authors that are women and are that don't fit into the mold, right? And they're trying to give voice for those of us that don't fall into sort of the big house publishing, the big genres. And we're not even sure how if this book will sell a lot or not, but it's a book that comes from the heart. And I think if you're in that place and you're ready to receive, I think people will enjoy it.
I believe a lot of people enjoy it. And I think so much is going to depend on what the reader brings to the book. What I brought to the book was an interest in compassionate leadership.
Yes.
And, I also suffered 4 years ago 2 losses, my sister and my mother, within 8 months. So that book is helping me with grief. It's helping me with, as an artist, to be more expressive. So I think whether you're a leader or a woman or an artist, or, just want to read a really incredible story, I have to say, one of the things I enjoyed as I know that your upbringing wasn't easy all the time, but I really enjoyed your dad as a character. You know, he's such a character. Like at the beginning of the book, you talk about what he did and for a living, and he was in Las Vegas. And I just sort of saw this sort of rat packy guy, Middle Eastern rat packy guy.
Totally. Totally. I mean,
uh,
my dad is, he was so good looking, like crazy off the charts good looking. The pictures of him where it's insane. And that was his calling card, right? That was, he was so smooth and so suave. And of course, what happens as your parents get older, you start seeing them as people, right? And even though he was a bit scary to me when I was young because he had a really bad temper, as I got older, I started to see the family he came from and realize, right, the persona he took on and the story he told himself. And I was able to see the real him more clearly. And that happened at the end of his life. And the same thing for my mother. I think for me, being able to be with my mom in the moment of her death was, if you say to me that's probably, this is going to sound a little weird, but it's a huge accomplishment. I was so scared of loss and death. I don't think I could have done it before. And for me to hold the space for her felt like just a full circle of, you know, where I had started, where I had come from. And it was also a moment of forgiveness, right? If we can't forgive our parents for whatever we think they did or didn't do for us, then we're stuck as children for the rest of our lives. And so for me, that was a moment where I really realized that your parents do the best they can with what they have, right? And then it's up to us to do the best we can with what we have for our children and leave them in a better place. And I feel that way with my employees too, right? And I do think there's something that happens when you get to on the other side of 50, where it's just not that interesting to go after sort of like, you know, monetary success, financial success. You're like, I could buy a bigger house or a nicer car, but you know, so what, really? Like, what it's really about is to give back and to help others. And for me, I get such joy from seeing the light go off in somebody's eyes. I did a keynote a couple of weeks ago at the Women in Leadership Conference at Haas, and one of the comments that came back was, this woman said that she'd written all these notes and she was going to take them back to her therapist and to discuss them with her. And I thought, yes, that's awesome.
that's awesome. That
So,
is awesome.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, well, we want everyone to buy and read your book, and you've also created a guide that people can read the book together with. So tell us where we can find all that information.
My website, and it's lailatarraf.com. And there is a tab on the navigation that says book. And under that, you will see I've put together a book club discussion guide that has, I don't know, like 20 questions or so that you can use if you decide to do a book club with Strong Like Water. And because it can be read on different levels, the questions also have a lot of breadth. It covers sort of adversity and leadership, and loss and being a mother. So it gives a way to start having conversations, which I think sometimes can be harder topics.
I've also been thinking that it's a really good book for men leaders to read about understanding vulnerability. So I think it can help. It will help a lot of people. And before we close today, Laila, you promised me you would read a little something from your book, so I'm going to ask you to do that now as a treat.
So the reason why I call the book Strong Like Water is after Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher who wrote the Tao Te Ching, and one of his verses was "Be like water," which in it he says, whatever is soft and yielding is more powerful than what is hard and rigid. So be like journey taught me is that you can still be strong, but you can also be strong like waters, or a little softer, a little more vulnerable. And you don't have to save everybody and be sort of, the hero. So the end of my book kind of captures that. While physically my journey had taken me to France, my inner journey brought me back to the little girl in that picture. I fought mightily along the way, fearful that my journey would make me soft, and it did. But soft turned out to be strong. It seemed appropriate that in the end, I wound up being the hero. No, not the hero, the heroine of my own story.
Thank you so much. And, your book is the first book I've ever read in my life that I read online.
Oh,
And
how was it?
It was great because it was a great book. I had this story about myself that I couldn't read books online. I had to read them on paper, but you broke that story for me. And you helped me so much by writing this book. So thank you very much for being with me today. It was a great honor and so much fun to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. It was great to chat with you, really.
Thanks for listening to the Compassionate Leaders podcast. You can learn more about us at compassionateleaderscircle.com. Please join us each week as we shine a light on compassionate leaders making a positive impact on their communities and the world.